Chapter 7 Killcraft. During your year with me, Scythe told Rowan and Citra, you will learn the proper way to wield various blades. You will become marksmen in more than a dozen types of firearms. You will have a working knowledge of toxicology, and you will train in the deadliest of martial arts. You will not become masters in these things. That takes many years, but will have the basic skills upon which you will build. Skills that will be useless for the one you don't choose, Citra pointed out. Nothing we learn is useless, he told her. While the Scythe's house was modest and unadorned, it had one impressive feature, the weapons den. It had once been the garage of the old house, but now was lined with the Scythe's extensive weapons collection. One wall was hung with blades and other firearms. A third wall looked like a pharmacist's shelves, and the fourth wall held more archaic objects. Elaborately carved bows, a quiver of obsidian-tipped arrows, frighteningly muscular crossbows, even a mace, although it was hard for them to imagine Scythe taking someone out with a mace. The fourth wall was more of a museum, they supposed, but the fact that they weren't sure was unsettling. The daily regimen was rigorous. Rowan and Citra trained with blades and staffs, sparring against the Scythe, who was surprisingly strong and limber for a man of his upbringing age. They learned to shoot at a special firing range for Scythes and apprentices, where weapons that were banned for public use were not only allowed but encouraged. They learned the basics of Black Widow Bocator, a deadly version of the ancient Cambodian martial art developed specifically for the Scythedom. It left them exhausted, but stronger than either of them had ever been. Physical training, however, was only half the regimen. There was an old oak table in the center of the weapons den, clearly a relic from the age of mortality. This is where Scythe Faraday spent several hours a day schooling them in the ways of a Scythe. Studies in mental acuity, history, and the chemistry of poisons, as well as daily entries in their apprentice journals. There was more to learn about death than either of them had ever considered. History, chemistry, writing, this is like a school, Rowan grumbled to Citra, because he wouldn't dare complain to Scythe Faraday. And then there was the gleaning. Each Scythe must perform a quota of 260 gleanings per year, Scythe Faraday told them, which averages to 5 per week. So you get weekends off, joked Rowan, trying to add a little nervous levity to the discussion. But Faraday was not amused. For him, nothing about gleaning was a laughing matter. On days that I don't glean, I attend funerals and do research for future gleanings. Scythes, or should I say, good Scythes, don't often have days off. The idea that not all Scythes were good was something neither Rowan or Citra had ever considered. It was widely accepted that Scythes adhered to the highest moral and ethical standards. They were wise in their dealings and fair in their choices. Even the ones who sought celebrity were seen to deserve it. The idea that some Scythes might not be as honorable as Scythe Faraday did not sit well with either of his new apprentices. The raw shock of gleaning never left Citra, although Scythe Faraday had not, since that first day, asked them to be the life-taking hand. Being an accomplice was difficult enough. Each untimely end came draped in its own shroud of dread, like a recurring nightmare that never lost its potency. She had thought she would grow numb, that she would become used to the work, but it didn't happen. It means I chose wisely, Scythe Faraday told her. If you do not cry yourself to sleep on a regular basis, you are not compassionate enough to be a Scythe. She adapted Rowan cried himself to sleep. He was the type of kid who kept his emotions very much to himself. She couldn't read him. He was opaque, and it bothered her. Or perhaps he was so transparent, she was seeing through him to the other side. She couldn't be sure. They quickly learned that Scythe Faraday was very creative in his gleaning methods. He never repeated the exact same method twice. But Aren't there Scythes who are ritualistic in their work? Scythe asked him, performing each cleaning exactly the same? Yes, but we must each find our own way, he told her. Our own code of conduct. I prefer to see each person I glean as an individual deserving of an end that it is unique. He outlined for them the 7 basic methods of killcraft. Most common are the 3 Bs: blade, bullet, and blunt force. The next 3 are asphyxiation, poison, and catastrophic induction, such as electrocution or fire, although I find fire a horrific way to glean and would never use it. The final method is weaponless force, which is why we train you in Vocator. To be a Scythe, he explained, meant that one had to be well versed in all methods. Cetra realized that being well versed meant she would have to participate in various types of cleanings. Would he have her pull the trigger, thrust the knife, swing the club? She wanted to believe she wasn't capable of it. She desperately wanted to believe she wasn't Scythe's material. It was the first time in her life that she aspired to fail. Rowan's feelings on the matter were mixed. He found that Scythe's Faraday's moral imperative and ethical high ground infused Rowan with purpose, but only in the Scythe's presence. When left to his own thoughts, Rowan doubted everything. Burned into his mind was the look on that woman's face as she fearfully, yet obediently, opened her mouth to be poisoned. The look on her face the moment before she bit down. I am an accomplice to the world's oldest crime, he told himself in his loneliness moments, and it would only get worse. While the journals of Scythes were public record, an apprentice still had the luxury of privacy. Scythe Faraday gave Rowan and Scythe pale leather-bound volumes of rough-edged parchment. To Rowan, it looked like a relic from the Dark Ages. He wouldn't have been surprised if Faraday gave them a feather quill to go with it. Mercifully, however, they were allowed to use normal writing utensils. A Scythe's journal is traditionally made of lambskin parchment and kid leather. I assume you mean kid as in goat, Rowan said, and not kid as in kid. That finally made the Scythes laugh. Cetra seemed to be annoyed that he had made Faraday laugh, as if it put him a point ahead of her. Rowan knew that as much as she hated the idea of being a Scythe, she would jockey for position over him because that's how she was hardwired. Competition was in her very nature. She couldn't help herself. Rowan was much better at picking his battles. He could compete when necessary, but rarely got caught up in petty one-upsmanship. He wondered if that would give him an advantage over Scythe. He wondered if he wanted one. Being a Scythe would not have been his life choice. He had not made any life choices yet, so he had no real clue what he would do with his eternal future. But now that he was being mentored by a Scythe, he began to feel he might have the mettle to be one. If Scythe Faraday had selected him as morally capable of the job, perhaps he was. As for the journal, Rowan hated it. In a large family where no one particularly cared to hear his thoughts on anything, he had become accustomed to keeping his thoughts to himself. I don't see what the big deal is, Cydra said as they worked in the journals after dinner one evening. No one will ever read it but you. So, why write it? Rowan snapped back. Cydra sighed, as if talking to a child. It's to prepare you for writing an official Scythe's journal. Whichever one of us gets the ring will be legally obligated by Commandment 6 to keep a journal every day of our lives. Which I'm sure no one will read, added Rowan. But people could read it. The site's archive is open to everyone. Yeah, said Rowan. Like the Thunderhead. People can read anything, but no one does. All they do is play games and watch cat holograms. Cydras racked. All the more reason not to worry about writing one. If it's lost among a gazillion pages, you can write your grocery list and what you ate for breakfast. No one will care. But Rowan cared. If he was going to put pen to paper, if he was going to do what the Scythe does, he would do it right, or not at all. And so far, as he looked at his painfully blank page, he was leaning toward not at all. He watched Scythe as she wrote, completely absorbed in her journal. From where he sat, he couldn't read what she had written, but he could tell it was in fine penmanship. It figures she would take penmanship in school. It was one of those classes people took just to be superior, like Latin. He supposed he'd have to learn to write in cursive if he became a Scythe, but right now he'd be stuck with inelegant, sloppy printing. He wondered, had Saitra and he been in the same school? Would they have gotten along? They probably wouldn't have even known each other. She was the type of girl who participates, and Ron was the kind of kid who avoids. Their circles were about as far from intersecting as Jupiter and Mars in the night sky. Now, however, they had been pulled into convergence. They were not exactly friends. They were never given the opportunity to develop a friendship before being thrust into apprenticeship together. They were partners, they were adversaries, and Ron found it increasingly hard to parse his feelings about her. All he knew was that he liked watching her write. Says Faraday was strict on his no family policy. It is ill advised for you to have contact with your family during your apprenticeship. It was difficult for Saitra. She missed her parents, but more than that, she missed her brother, Ben, which surprised her, because at home she never had much patience for him. Rowan seemed to have no problem with being separated from his family. They'd much rather have their immunity than have me around anyway, he told Saitra. Boo-hoo, Saitra said. Am I supposed to feel sorry for you? Not at all. Envious, maybe. It makes it easier for me to leave it all behind. Says Faraday did bend his own rule once. However, about a month in, he allowed Saitra to attend her aunt's wedding. While everyone else was dressed in gowns and tuxedos, says Faraday did not allow Saitra to dress up, lest you feel yourself a part of that world. It worked. Wearing simple street clothes amid the pageantry made her feel even more the outsider, and the apprentice armband made it worse. Perhaps this was the reason Faraday allowed her to attend. To make crystal clear, the distinction between who she had been and who she was now. So, what it's like? Asked her cousin Amanda. Gleaning and stuff. Is it like gross? We're not allowed to talk about it, Cedra told her, which was not true, but she had no interest in discussing gleaning like it was a school gossip. She should have nurtured that conversation, however, instead of shutting it down, because Amanda was one of the few people who spoke to her. There were plenty of sideways glances and people talking about her when they thought she wasn't watching, but most everyone avoided her like she carried a mortal age disease. Perhaps if she already had her ring, they might try to curry favor in hopes of receiving immunity, but apparently, as an apprentice, she offered them nothing but the creeps. Her brother was standoffish, and even speaking to her mother was awkward. She asked standard questions like, "Are you eating?" and "Are you getting enough sleep?" "I understand there's a boy living with you," her father said. "He has his own room and he's not interested in me at all," she told him, which she found totally embarrassed to admit. Cetra sat through the wedding ceremony, but excused herself before the reception and took a public car back to Sage Faraday's house, unable to bear another minute of it. "You're back early," Sage Faraday commented when she returned, and although he seemed surprised, he had set her place for dinner. Sights are supposed to have a keen appreciation of death, yet there are some things that are beyond even our comprehension. The woman I gleaned today asked me the oddest question. "Where do I go now?" she asked. "Well," I explained calmly, "your memories and live recording are already stored in the Thunderhead, so it won't be lost. Your bodies return to the earth in a manner determined by your next of kin." "Yes, I know all that," she said, "but what about me?" The question perplexed me. As I said, your memory construct will exist in the Thunderhead, loved ones will be able to talk to it, and your construct will respond. "Yes," she said, getting a bit agitated, "but what about me?" I gleaned her then. Only after she was gone did I say, I don't know. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curry. Chapter 8. A Matter of Choice. I will glean alone today, says Faraday told Rowan and Scythe one day in February, the second month of their apprenticeship. While I am gone, I have a task for each of you. He took Scythe into the weapons den. You, Scythe, shall polish each of my blades. She had been in the weapons den nearly every day for lessons, but to be there alone, nothing but her and the instruments of death, was entirely different. The Scythe went to the blade wall, which had everything from swords to switchblades. Some are merely dusty, others tarnished. You shall decide what type of care each one needs. She watched the way his eyes moved from one blade to another, lingering long enough, perhaps, to recall a memory. You've used them all? She asked. Only about half of them, and even then, for only one gleaning. He reached up and pulled the rapier from the fourth wall, the one with the older-looking weapons. This one looked like the kind one of the three musketeers might have used. When I was young, I had much more of a flair for drama. I went to glean a man who fancied himself a fencer, so I challenged him to a duel. And you won? No, I lost. Twice. He skewered me through the neck the first time, and tore open my femoral artery the second. He was very good. Each time, after I woke up in the revival center, I returned to challenge him. His wins bought him time, but he was chosen to be gleaned, and I would not relent. Some size will change their minds, but that leads to compromise, and it favors the persuasive. I make my decisions firm. In the fourth bout, I pierced his heart with the tip of my blade. As he breathed his last, he thanked me for allowing him to die fighting. It was the only time in all my years as a Scythe that I had been thanked for what I do. He sighed, and put the rapier back in what Scythe realized was a place of honor. If you have all these weapons, why did you take our knife that day you came to glean my neighbor? Scythe had to ask. The Scythe grinned. To gauge your reaction, I threw it away, she told him. I suspected as much, he said, but this you will polish. Then he left her there. When he was gone, Scythe studied the weapons. She was not particularly morbid, but she found herself wanting to know which blades had been used, and how. It seemed to her that a noble weapon deserved to have its story passed on, and if not to her and Rowan, then who? She pulled a scimitar from the wall, a heavy beast that could decapitate you with a single swing. Had Scythe Faraday used it for a beheading? It was, in a way, his style, swift, painless, efficient. As she moved it clumsily through the air, she wondered if she had the strength to behead someone. My God, what am I becoming? She put the weapon on the table, grabbed the rug, and rubbed polish on it. And when she finished, she went to the next, and the next, trying not to see her reflection in each of the gleaming blades. Rowan's task was not as visceral, but was even more troubling. Today, you shall lay the groundwork for my next gleaning, such Faraday told him, then gave him a list of parameters that tomorrow's subject should have. All the information you need is in the Thunderhead, if you're clever enough to find it. Then he left for the day's cleaning. Rowan almost made the mistake of giving the list of parameters to the Thunderhead and asking it for a subject, until he remembered that asking the Thunderhead for assistance was strictly forbidden for Scythes. They had full access to the Great Cloud's wealth of information, but could not access its algorithmic, conscious mind. Scythe Faraday had told them of a Scythe who tried to do so. The Thunderhead itself reported him to the High Blade, and he was severely disciplined. How is a Scythe disciplined? Rowan had asked. He was put to death 12-fold by a jury of Scythes, then revived each time. After the 12th revival, he was on probation for a year. Rowan imagined a jury of Scythes would be very creative in their methods of punishment. He suspected that dying 12 times at the hands of Scythes would be a lot worse than splatting. He began to enter search parameters. He was instructed to have his search include not just their city, but all of Mid-America, which stretched nearly 1,000 miles across the middle of the continent. Then he narrowed the search to towns with populations under 10,000 that were also on the banks of rivers. Then to homes or apartments that were within 100 feet of the riverbank. Then he searched for people 20 and older who lived in those residences. That gave him more than 40,000 people. He had done that in 5 minutes. The next few requirements were not going to be as easy to nail down. The subject must be a strong swimmer. He got a list of every high school and university in each river town and cross-referenced everyone who had been in a swim team for the past 20 years or had registered for a triathlon. About 800 people. The subject must be a dog lover. Using such Faraday's access code, he found the subscription lists of every publication and blog dealing with dogs. He accessed Pet Store database to get a list of anyone who made regular purchases of dog food over the past few years. That brought the number down to 112 names. The subject must have a history of heroism in a non-professional capacity. He painstakingly searched for words like hero, bravery, and rescue for all 112 names. He thought he'd be lucky if a single one came up, but to his surprise, 4 of them were noted as having done something heroic at some point in their lives. He clicked on each name and brought up 4 pictures. He immediately regretted it, because the moment those names had faces, they became people instead of parameters. A man with a round face and a winning smile. A woman who could have been anyone's mother. A guy with a bad case of bad hair. A man who looked like he hadn't saved in 3 days. 4 people, and Rowan was about to decide which one would die tomorrow. He immediately found himself linked toward the unsaving man, but realized he was showing a bias. A person shouldn't be discriminated against because he hadn't saved for a picture. And was he ruling out the woman just because she was a woman? Okay then, the guy with the smile. But was Rowan overcompensating now by choosing the most pleasant looking of them? He decided to learn more about each of them, using Faraday's access code to dig up more personal information than he really should have been allowed to. But this was a person's life he was dealing with. Shouldn't he use any means necessary to make his decision fair? This one had run into a burning building in his youth to save a family member, but this one has 3 young kids. But this one volunteers at an animal shelter, but this one's brother was clean just 2 years ago. He thought each fact would help him, but the more he came to know about each of them, the harder the decision became. He kept digging into their lives, getting more and more desperate, until the front door opened and Scythe Faraday returned. It was dark out when had night fallen. The Scythe looked weary, and his robes were splattered with blood. Today's cleaning was more troublesome than expected, he said. Scythe came out of the weapons stand. All blades are now polished to a perfect sign, she announced. Faraday gave her his note of approval. Then he turned to Rowan, who still sat at the computer. And who do we clean next? I narrowed it down to 4. And, said the Scythe, all 4 fit the profile. And, said the Scythe again. Well, this one just got married, and this one just bought a house. Pick one, said the Scythe. And this one received a humanitarian award last year. Pick one, yelled the Scythe with a ferocity Rowan had never heard from the man. The very walls seemed to recoil from his voice. Rowan thought he might get a reprieve, as he had when Faraday asked him to hand that woman the cyanide pill. But no, today's test was very different. Rowan looked to Scythe, who still stood in the doorway of the weapons den, frozen like a bystander at an accident. He was truly alone in this awful decision. Rowan looked to the screen, grimacing and pointing to the man with bad hair. Him, Rowan said. Clean him. Rowan closed his eyes. He had just condemned the man to death because he'd had a bad hair day. Then he felt Faraday put a firm hand on his shoulder. He thought he'd get a reprimand, but instead the Scythe said, Well done. Rowan opened his eyes. Thank you, sir. Were this not the hardest thing you've ever done, I'd be concerned. Does it ever get easier? Rowan asked. I certainly hope not, the Scythe said. The following afternoon, Bradford Siller returned from work to find the Scythe sitting in his living room. The Scythe stood up as Bradford entered. His instincts told him to turn and run, but before he did, a teenage boy with a green armband, who had been standing off to the side, closed the door behind him. He waited with increasing dread for the Scythe to speak, but instead the Scythe gestured to the boy, who cleared his throat and said, Mr. Seiler, you have been chosen for gleaning. Tell him the rest, Rowan, said the Scythe patiently. I mean to say that I chose you for gleaning. Bradford looked between the two of them, suddenly deeply relieved, because this was clearly some sort of joke. Okay, who the hell are you? Who put you up to this? Then the Scythe held up his hand, showing his ring, and Bradford's spirits fell again, like the second drop of a roller coaster. That was no fake. It was the real thing. The boy is one of my apprentices, the Scythe said. I'm sorry, said the boy. It's not personal, you just fit a certain profile. Back in the age of mortality, lots of people died trying to perform rescues. A lot of them were people who jumped into flooded rivers to save their pets. Most of them were good swimmers, but that doesn't matter in a flood. The dogs, thought Bradford. That's right, the dogs. You can't hurt me, he said. You do, and my dogs will rip you to pieces. But where were they? Then a girl came out of his bedroom, wearing the same armband as the boy. I sedated all three, she said. They'll be fine, but they won't be bothering anyone. There was blood on her arm. Not the dog's, but her own. They had beaten her. Good for them. It's not personal, the boy said again. I'm sorry. One apology is enough, the Scythe told the boy, especially when it's genuine. Bradford guffawed, even though he knew this was real. He just somehow found this funny. His knees weak, he settled onto the sofa, and his laughter resolved into misery. How was this fair? How was any of this fair? But then the boy knelt down before him, and when Bradford looked up, he was caught by the boy's gaze. It was as if he were looking into the eyes of a much older soul. Listen to me, Mr. Siller, the boy said. I know you saved your sister from a fire when you were my age. I know how hard you struggle to save your marriage, and I know you think that your daughter doesn't love you, but she does. Bradford stared at him, incredulous. How do you know all this? The boy pursed his lips. It's our job to know. Your gleaning won't change any of that. You lived a good life. Scythe Faraday is here to complete it for you. Bradford begged to make a phone call, pleaded for just one more day. But of course, those things were not granted. They said he could write a note, but he couldn't bring himself to find anything to write. I know how that feels, the boy told him. How will you do it? He finally asked them. The Scythe responded. I have chosen for you a traditional drowning. We shall take you to the river. I shall submerge you until your life leaves you. Bradford clenched his eyes. I've heard that drowning is a bad way to go. Can I give him some of the stuff I gave the dogs? The girl asked. Knock him out so that he'll already be unconscious? The Scythe considered it and nodded. If you choose, we can spare you the suffering. But Bradford shook his head, realizing he wanted every second he had left. No, I want to be awake. If drowning was to be his last experience, then let him experience it. He could feel his heart beating faster, his body trembling with the surge of adrenaline. He was afraid, but fear meant he was still alive. Come then, the Scythe told him gently. We'll all go down to the river together. Scythe was awed by how Rowan handled himself. Although he began a little shaky when he first spoke to the man, he took charge. He took the reins of that man's fear and gave him peace. Scythe only hoped that when it came her turn to make a choice, she could keep her composure as well as Rowan had. All she had done today was tranquilize a few dogs. Sure, she got bitten in the process, but it was nothing, really. She tried to convince Faraday to take the dogs to a shelter, but he wouldn't have it. He did allow her to call the shelter to come for the dogs, and the coroner to come for the man. The Scythe offered to take her to a hospital for some speed healing of the dog bite on her arm, but she declined. Her own nights would heal it by morning, and besides, there was something compelling about the discomfort. She owed it to the dead man to hurt a little for him. That was impressive, she told Rowan on the long ride home. Yeah, right until I puked on the riverbank. But that was only after he was cleaned, Scythe pointed out. You gave that man strength to face death. Rowan shrugged. I guess. Scythe found it both maddening and endearing how modest he could be. There's a poem by Honorable Scythe Socrates, one of the first Scythes. He wrote many poems, but this one has grown to be my personal favorite. Have not a hand in the blade with abandon. Call from the fold of the brazen bolt. For a dog who just might love the bark and the bite is a carrion raven, the craven of old. It reminds me that in spite of our lofty ideals and the many safeguards to protect the Scython from corruption and depravity, we must always be vigilant, because power comes infected with the only disease left to us, the virus called human nature. I fear for us all if Scythes begin to love what they do. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curry.